That music's nice and loud, I guess. But good morning, everybody. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to day one of the forum, the Estate and Succession Planning Forum for Rural Families. Great to have you all here, and I'm certainly excited to be here with you today. I spent all of last week travelling down to Adelaide, Mount Gambier, Canberra, Tamworth, and up to Rockhampton, seeing clients last week. Caught up with a couple of you that are actually in this forum. So great to meet you in person and speaking to you today as well. So thanks everybody for being on board, and congratulations on your decision. I think it's a lot of congratulations to you in regard to making the decision to create certainty, peace of mind, confidence, security, and so on for your family. You should be very proud of the fact that you're doing this, because let me tell you, 99% of the families that I talk to haven't started this, or if they have started it, they've not finished it and haven't done it well. So well done on being here. Congratulations, and welcome to today. We've got four of our team on today speaking, and I know they'll create a lot of value for you. And the feedback I've had from the workshop we did prior to this, and for the session we did the other day, the introductory session for the forum, there's certainly been some great feedback, and I really appreciate all the nice things that have been said. So having said all that, I sat here this morning and I printed out my 60-page workbook so I could go through it with you today. Great job, the girls that put all this together. You can see, I'm not sure which way to wave this book, but I hope you've got the workbook with you, and you'll need that today as we go along. Whether you've got it on your iPad or you've printed it out or whatever you've done with it, we'll be certainly utilising the the workbook today. So what I'd like to ask is, and I've got some people chatting away on the chat roll already. Just would like to know what percentage of the workbook have you been through already? Have you done a little, a lot, haven't started yet? And if you can just make some comments there in the chat roll, I'd really like to see where everyone's at with having started the workbook and started filling in some of those questions. I think the earlier you can get those questions done, the more this will all make sense to you as you go along. So please, there's no prizes, there's no book giveaways or anything like that, and there's no shame if you haven't even started it. Just it'll help me understand where everyone is at in regard to getting their book started. So just a reminder here too, we've had the kickoff call on the 4th. Seems forever away, but it wasn't that long ago. Today, obviously, 10 a.m. till 12:30 Queensland time. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. to 12:30 Queensland time, which I guess means 11 o'clock in New South Wales and 10:30, I think, in South Australia. I'm thinking, but don't quote me on that, please. Please check your local phone. And the Q&A session, remember, is 5:30 p.m. till 7 p.m. Queensland time on Wednesday. And then you've got the session again on Thursday from 10 a.m. till midday on Thursday. So just hope you've got all those locked away, and because obviously it's much better to be live to these events. Just reading, some done as much as they could. Been a lot going on. That's okay. Wherever you are, it's okay. We will help you through the process. And remember, this is a do-it-yourself program, what we're going through here with you now. So as long as you do get it done, I guess that's the main issue. Now, just moving on once again, today what we're talking about is we've got Peter McNulty, we've got Peter McVeigh, we have Michael Cowley talking on structuring and so on, and yep, he will come to me in a minute. Stephen Lutz, who will be talking on certainly the farm viability issues and so on that you saw Peter talk about already. Stephen talk about already. So we've got plenty happening today, but I wanted to start off today by really just going through some of the key issues and what we're trying to achieve with you here. We've got a great number of people on board in regard to who have joined up with the forum, and I want to thank you all for having the confidence in us to do that. The response rate based on the number of people that were at the workshop was mind-blowing, the number of people that have come through to the forum. So thank you for your trust in us. Remember, all the presenters will be here on Wednesday night for the 90 minutes. So the whole team of 9 will be here Wednesday night. I've already had some questions emailed into me, questions that people didn't want to put necessarily in the chat roll, but questions that they want covered, and all the specialist presenters will be covering those off on Wednesday night. So please make sure we create as much value as we can for you personally, and the way we do that is answering your questions, because this is online. We know that we're speaking in general terms to all of you who are here. For us to be specific for you, you need to ask the questions. So please don't be shy in regard to getting those questions in. Sue Ellen and Tori will look forward to grabbing those, or if you want to email those to me, as some people have, and we'll get those lined up so the right people are answering those on Wednesday night. Now, I just want to go back and remind you, here's the team for now and then. So just if you can make sure you put your requests in for all those bonuses that we did. I'm going to say again, and as we did at the start of the workshop sessions, that at the end of the forum, there's an offer available for people who want to work directly with us on a done-for-you basis. Obviously, the forum is, and all the tools and capabilities we're sharing with you, this is very much a do-it-yourself basis of getting your estate and succession planning done. We can give you all the tools, all the questionnaires, all the forms, and so on. But effectively, at the end of the day, this is a do-it-yourself program. And at the end of the forum, if you find that it's just too much to get away and do it yourself, which is something that I would do, you certainly will have the opportunity to work with us in regard to getting all this done, and to have a facilitated and guided way to get it done, and someone to stay on your case until it gets finished. But we'll talk about that more as we go along. Now, I just wanted to check in regard to the workbook, because everyone, I hope you've all got your workbooks out today, because there's questions and so on in there which will be valuable for you to go through. Can you just make a comment? Does anyone not have access to their workbook? If you can let us know, and Tori or Sue Ellen might be able to just give you a link where you can download that again if you haven't got it already. As I said before, I had the privilege of catching up with a couple of people in the course today during the last week, and I really appreciated the comments, thoughts, and the feedback in regard to what we've been able to provide so far in regard to helping people take action in regard to getting all this stuff done. And certainly one of the people was well on the way in regard to filling out all the forms, and that was very commendable. But as I say, don't stress if you haven't done it. We've still got plenty of time to move forward. So there's all the people that are in over the next couple of days. What I'd like to talk about now, the workbook, you've got that. And as I say, if you haven't, please ask in the chat roll. I'm just checking over here. Just ask in the chat roll, and the girls will get that for you. But today, I just want to remind what the 3 big roadblocks are to family, estate, and succession planning, and why we're so motivated to help you with this. And the biggest roadblocks, as you know, are in regard to communication issues, they're in regard to family conflict, and they're in regard to procrastination. If anyone thinks that there's another one that trumps any of those three, please, as I say, and I'm not just driving everyone, I suppose I am, to the chat roll, because communication is a good thing. But if you've got something else you think is certainly trumps communication, conflict, or procrastination as to why people have issues and lack of action in regard to their estate and succession planning, please write something in the chat. I'd love to have your experiences and so on. But look, I've been speaking with people, as I said earlier. We went down to Adelaide, Canberra, Tamworth, and so on up to Rockhampton during last week. Spoke with a lot of existing clients and spoke and sat with them, with their families, with their children, some cases grandchildren, and so on. And the communication issue certainly was one of the issues that, with most families, we've been able to open up communication, which really eliminates the conflict. And that's kind of the key thing, I think. The conflict comes because you don't communicate well. And I've said this probably a million times, but you can't fix this from within your family. You can't just have a family meeting, sitting everyone around, sit people around the table and hope like hell that you're going to resolve this. Whether it's me or whether it's someone else, you really need someone from outside the family to help the conversations, to help the communication, and so on. And not picking on accountants by any means, but I'm not picking on accountants by any means. However, what I find is that they know you too well. They have relationships with everyone in the family, including the children, and it's all sort of set in stone, their opinions on what they think should happen and so on. And you really need a clean set of eyes to come in, look at what's happening in your family, and open up the communication. And what I like to do is to start having one-on-one conversations with our clients and customers. I don't start with a family around the table conversation. I think that's an absolute waste of time, because what happens is mum and dad will say what they say, and the kids will sit there mostly and shut up because of respect for their parents. And occasionally you'll get one of the kids will sort of jump up and say something. They're maybe the louder ones or the more confident ones in the family out of the children. And you get the quiet ones or the reserved ones will sit there and say nothing, and they'll walk out and they'll be steaming out of their ears because they didn't get a chance in their mind to express themselves, even though they were given that opportunity. Yeah, people don't want to have, they don't necessarily want to be honest in a round table conversation with mum and dad. And that's why having someone from outside the family come in, have individual conversations with everyone, you can get to the truth of the matter. You can help open up the communication, get rid of the conflict. And with our 90-day process that we're now introducing, for the people that work with us on a done-for-you basis, that certainly eliminates all the procrastination, because there's always reasons why you can't get this stuff done. We get busy with life. We get busy with shearing and mustering the cattle and tending to the crops and so on. So many times people do need someone to give them a push along the way to help eliminate the procrastination. So what we're going to cover is certainly I want to make sure why we talked already about why you can't get this sorted within the family by trying to do it yourself. And 99 times out of 100, your existing professional advisors aren't going to be able to help you that much anyway. As I said many times, the existing advisors are too close, and oftentimes if they're not doing this, I mean, we do this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This is all I do. And a great example was when I was in Rockhampton yesterday. I was having lunch with some friends of family. I was at a funeral yesterday, and these people sort of asked what I did, and I said, I help rural families with succession planning and so on. And it was interesting. They said, "Oh, well, we've just done ours." And I said, "Oh, that's fantastic." I said, "It's so rare. It's so rare to hear people say that they've already taken action on this." they say, yes, we worked with our existing accountant and our local solicitor, and we got all this sorted. And I said, that's fantastic. And then they started with the 20 questions, and what would you do? What do you think about this and all that? And so I started asking them a few questions, and I said, well, do you have testamentary trusts in your will, for example? And they sort of looked blankly at me and said, no. What are testamentary trusts? And it just brought home straight away, before I asked another question, it was kind of like, that's what you get when you deal with GPs instead of specialists, is you're not getting full advice in regard to protection of assets and so on. And I said, well, okay, what's your succession plan look like? And they told me that they were just going to transfer everything to the son now. They had the land, the stock, and the plant and equipment and so on was all in one entity. It was just in a sort of a partnership of sorts, and with mum and dad, and they were just going to transfer everything to the son, and he was going to take it over. And these parents were only 60-ish, I guess, if that, and they have a long time to live yet. And they were just handing everything to their son, and they said, oh, we got some of the money off farm. And I said, oh, the children? Yeah, two girls. Have you had a chat with them? Oh, no, we didn't involve them in the conversation. And I just thought, wow, you're just setting yourself up for a fail in so many areas. One, that the girls have been disregarded. The two daughters have been disregarded. The son now owns everything. And, at the end of the day, there's no lease agreements, there's no asset protection. If he gets sued, has a matrimonial, all those sorts of things. So, I think you're understanding what we're helping you with here is ways to make sure you've got specialist advice and you're getting proper advice from outside. And that's why we've created the whole master plan process, and we're focusing on just a 90-day process to get this done. Now, we've got all these other people, you'll hear from Peter in a minute talking about transition planning and so on. But we've also got all these other specialists that are involved in the process. And I guess our role, Rural Succession Solutions, is to be the ringmaster, so to speak, or the facilitator. And we involve the professionals. We come in, have a look at your whole situation, and then work out how best to get to your result that you're desiring. Who you need to talk to, we give you choices in regard to the people that you want to deal with and so on. But, our role and our skill, I guess, is in regard to making sure you get from point A to point B and you get there in the best possible way. That's why we created the master plan. And, as you've seen, probably we go through, we do a diagnostic with you. We take you through the whole mastery process. We do all this within 90 days. As I say, we have all the tools and resources, and you're getting the online version of all this. So, that's a great part of what you're getting here. You can go through all this at your own pace, and on the 1st of December, you're getting access to the full online version of all these tools and so on as well. But that will take you through getting your estate plan done, getting your succession plan done, tools and thoughts in regard to how you have the communication with the kids and so on, and the gratitude conversations and all those sorts of things. But, it's like the 9 of us, myself and the other 8 presenters are all sort of building blocks, and it's a matter of, working out who you need along the journey and making sure you only need to use the bits that you really need to use. But more importantly, the process that we have rigorously built over years is what the greatest value is for you. The checks and balances to make sure the right things happen at the right time. As said, you'll have access to all that from the 1st to the 12th, but you've certainly got all the workbooks and so on between now and those. So, and also, as we said, you can go through, you can do this piecemeal at your speed. You can use the DIY process, which you're getting access to, or if you want to go a step further, you can do the done for you process that we do with most of our clients. Now, once again, we've don't forget to write down questions. I haven't had a chance, I've been talking too much, to look at the questions in the chat roll there, but please keep putting in the questions so that we can answer your specific questions on Wednesday night. And I'm going to introduce Peter McNulty in a second. And Peter's, I'm just going to say, one of the biggest issues that I've been facing, and it's recently, Peter, you'd be happy to know, is that it's, and I'll just bring you up on the screen if that's okay, and get rid of that. We'll come up jointly. Pete, how are you, Pete? You're muted at the moment, so I'll keep talking.
I'm better now. I found the button. Here's the button. There it is down there. Morning. Good morning, Mark, and good morning, everyone.
Yeah, good to have you here, Pete. I'm just going to give what you do a bit of a wrap, Pete, because I find more recently that in fact, it's kind of around one town in New South Wales, and we've struck a cluster of people who, the biggest issue is knowing when to let go and to hand over to the next generation. It's like must be something in the water in this town. I'm not sure what it is, but we've got one guy in his 90s. His grandkids are now running the farm. But he hasn't even handed any control over to the middle generation, let alone the bottom generation, and he's getting to a stage where everything's starting to get a bit haphazard, and the decisions. I won't say it's Joe Biden sort of vintage, but it's getting a bit that way. Some of the decisions
that's another one.
That's right, the Windsors, yeah, a little haphazard. We've got another one where Dad thinks he's letting go, but he's not. The kids are all scared of him, and don't know how to sort of take over. And we've got another one where the grandmother, she's still a shareholder in the business, and she's in her 90s, and we can just see it all turning to dust if they don't start working out a way to hand over. But Pete, I'm cutting into your time, so I'll let go and hand over to you, and I'll bring up your slides.
All right, thanks, Mark. Great. Okay, and look, thank you everyone for enrolling. It's a good sign that that there's an issue and it's one that needs to be dealt with. And Mark's already done some case studies, so I can cut down on mine. One of them was pretty much the same, but it's about families who just don't do the work that they need to in this regard. So so as I've said in the introductory sessions, there's no succession without transition, and in the sense that unless the owner's prepared to let go, then the succession isn't going to work. So the key messages are again ones that I talked about before. So Mark, if you wouldn't mind moving on, I think you're controller of the slides. Yep, thank you. So again, if you're struggling to move on, you're not on your own, because this is the common problem, and it is a lot about procrastination, which I'll talk again about in a minute. But remember, it's not just about you. And again, Mark's examples are classics, that there are generations who are being affected by the lack of handover and the lack of a plan. Doesn't mean that you have to hand over straight away, but everybody would like the certainty of a plan. As we'll see shortly, the next phase in life could be a long time, and so it's important to plan new activities, and we'll see why again as a refresher in a minute. What we at Transition Planning Australia can help you with is a new process to help you plan that life after work, and I'll try to explain why that's important. And some of the exercises that I've got in the workbook are tasters of what we do in that workshop. So the challenge is really for you to take a new perspective on the future and not look at that as a way to fill in time, but a way to actually to make a difference and continue to add to society and have some purpose in life. So next slide, thanks, Mark. So these are the issues that you're probably thinking about, and that's part of the reason why you're here. Am I ready to hand over? The land is my life. Who will I be, and what will it be like? Thanks, Mark. So they're the common questions, and these are the reasons why people don't think about these things. It's uncertainty about an unknown future. It's a worry about a loss of meaning, because life on the land gives you meaning and purpose. It's what you've done for who knows how long. And you're worried about leaving will give you a loss of social status and identity. And you may have no vision about what to do in your new life, because you've just been too busy doing what you're doing to actually think about that. So it's easier to procrastinate, and that's what it's all about. And we believe that everyone's entitled to a meaningful life after full-time work, and that's what we're here for. So how did I get into this work? As Mark said earlier, I'm a lawyer. I was a partner with McCullough Robertson in Brisbane for 25 years, and I'm still a consultant there. A lot of my work was estate planning and tax planning and succession planning. And the common feature that I found was that with my, working with a team of advisors, we could devise brilliant plans to hand things over to the next generation. But unless the owners were prepared to let go, it simply didn't happen. So I went looking for solutions to those emotional and personal sorts of things, and I found Successful Transition Planning Institute in Boston, and my material is based on theirs, and hence the creation of Transition Planning Australia. So the case studies, I can't remember whether I mentioned this one or not, but How to Become an Alcoholic in 6 Months is a true story of someone not in the rural industry, but it doesn't matter. Principles apply the same. Sold their business for a lot of money, and had no plan for what they were going to do in the next phase of life, and became an alcoholic in 6 months. Dad won't let go. Well, Mark's already given you a few examples of that, so I don't need to reiterate that. And probably I might have a lot of dads here, and there might be a lot of the next generation watching this show as well. But I'm sure you all know what I'm talking about there. And but I met at a function a couple of years ago some people who had left the farm, left the family farm, and they were comfortable in Karoi. They had a hobby farm there, had actually spent the time to think about what they were going to do after the farm, and that's what they'd done. So there are solutions to that. What I find is that this is a three-legged stool we're looking at here. In that the next phase is about family, legal, financial, and structural, and future life readiness as well. So Mark's assembled a wonderful team of specialists who can help in each of these areas, and so you will have the opportunity to satisfy each of or be able to keep each of those legs going. And of course, what happens when one of the legs of the stool isn't there? Well, the stool's going to fall over. Okay. So again, I've talked about the keys to happiness before, and to be happy and healthy at any stage of life, you need to be physically healthy, mentally healthy, have a range of social connections, and a sense of purpose in life. And our life on the farm or any work will provide a number of activities which will satisfy those keys to happiness. So when we leave that farm, we need to find new activities to replace them so that we don't fall into a hole, become bored and depressed, and it's a slippery slope from there. And again, I'm sure you've all seen people who have had that problem. The alcoholic in 6 months is a classic case of that. And retirement could be a long time. It could be 25 years. If you leave at 60 or 65 or 70, life expectancy these days is into the 90s, and so it could be 25 years. So you actually need to spend time to find new activities. It doesn't just happen. And there's pretty serious consequences of the failure to plan that next phase. And again, I've gone through those before. So if we could just have that next slide. Thanks, Mark. Yep. A lack of purpose or direction in life. Boredom and depression, which can lead to physical and mental health, and there can be financial consequences if you don't actually go through the exercise of handing over at the right time. And remember, it's not just about you, it's about the other generations, and it's about making sure that you've planned so that you've got a comfortable life in retirement as well, rather than that quite disturbing example Mark just gave of a family who are just going to hand everything over and life goes on without regard to their retirement or the rest of the family. So there's two types of transition require planning, both your personal transition plan so that you've got a meaningful, fulfilling life after the farm, and also the business transition plan as well. So the elements in a successful personal transition plan, they're listed there. So acknowledging your concerns, and we'll do an exercise on that in a moment. And this is a big reason for the procrastination, if I can just talk about that. People procrastinate because they don't want to have to face the difficult decisions. if you actually, and the way to work through procrastinating is actually to understand that you're procrastinating, understand why you are. We've already looked at the reasons why, and develop a plan to overcome those problems. And that's what you're here for. Okay, so if you have been procrastinating, congratulations for understanding that and starting the process to overcome that. So these are the steps, and so we have I guess our program involves a 2-day workshop or 12 hours. So we're looking at a 4 half days on an online version, which I'll talk a little bit more about later on. And what we do there is we acknowledge the fears that you have. We have a process to deal with those fears. It actually means taking the time to spend some time planning those activities for your new life, consider options, brainstorm with like-minded people. In the workshop scenario, it's quite amazing how many light bulbs come on for people as we work through the sessions. And at the end of the day, you actually create your personalised plan. But the key is it actually teaches a process to do that. So obviously, in the 2 days, you create a future life plan, but that's not fixed in stone. Things change, and the process and understanding how you go about it is the important part. Okay, so here's a few exercises now as a bit of a taster. If you go to your workbook, page 18, I found this exercise on. Now, I didn't keep track of my time. How am I? 10 minutes. Actually, I'm pretty much on time by the looks of things. So let's just spend a couple of minutes now. If you go to page 18 of the workbook, and you'll see some concerns there. So we'll just spend a couple of minutes looking at these now. So which of these fears do you have about the next stage of life? Now, concerns or fears, it's the same thing. Are you concerned about being bored, concerned about an unknown future, feeling meaningless or useless, worried about aging? Yeah, we're all doing that. Whether we're worried about it's another thing, I suppose. Worried about ill health. The funny thing is that's actually a result of some of these others not being addressed rather than an outcome in itself, in my personal view. Worried about losing your identity. I can still remember when I retired as a partner at McCullough Robertson, became a consultant, people would say, "Oh, you've retired, have you?" No, I haven't retired. I'm just doing something different. I'm still very much active and doing the work that I love as I was then. Losing your purpose in life is a worry. Financial limitation, well, that's what this team of people is here for you to help you make sure that you can be financially secure as well as everything else, and a worry about social connection. So just spend a minute and tick the boxes of those if you're worried about any of those, because in our, as I say, in our Live with Purpose workshop, we can help you work through a process to overcome them. And you might have some other concerns as well. So there's room at the bottom of page 18 for you to fill out, to write those in as well. So I'll just give you a minute to do that now. I'll have a glass of water. Okay, well, we'll keep going. Obviously, you can go back and fill that out and give it some more thought later on. But again, that's an important part of the workshop, is to actually work through a pretty neat process. So I mentioned Successful Transition Planning Institute. Jack Beauregard is the creative founder of that, and he created this system, which I think is a very useful one. He also developed this concept of transition thinking, which is a different approach to thinking that we adopt here. So typically in our life, we make decisions all the time. We make a decision and we move on, and our life. I guess our approach to life is that things are right and wrong, good or bad, black and white, and so it's an either or sort of perspective that we have in life, and most of the time. what we follow and encourage people to do is what we call transition thinking, and that's actually taking a both and approach, as we call it. So here's a good example. So have a look at that glass of water. Is that half full or half empty? Now, I had an engineer in one of these sessions says, "Oh, it looks like it's a bit less than half full," but no engineers here, I hope. So assume it's half full, or is it half empty? So I guess just think to yourself, yes, I'm either half full or I'm half empty. Well, the answer is it's both. Okay, it's half full and half empty, and that's a really simple, straightforward example of not either or. It can be a both and. All right. So when you're making decisions about a lot of things in this process, don't limit yourself to the first thing you think of. Take a broader approach to it. So that's a very much a critical part of our workshop. Okay, so that's another quick example. The next thing, next time if we could go to the workbook, and remember I talked about looking at ways, so finding new activities to fill in your time once you've finished your life on the farm. And it doesn't have to be finished full time. It can be, even if you're phasing out, it's actually, in fact, that's the best way to spend time, to find new activities, and so that you can ease out, and it makes the process of transitioning that much easier. So just go to page 19 and just spend a couple of minutes writing down some things that you enjoyed doing when you were younger. So as an example, a workshop I did a couple of years ago, no, it must have been more than a couple of years, it was pre-COVID, so say 3 years ago, was a lady who was a 70-year-old accountant, and she just worked in her business non-stop, so she desperately needed the workshop, which she acknowledged was great for her. I asked her this question and she said, "When I was 16, my father sold our piano, and I resented that ever since." And so she said, "You know what? I'm going to go and buy myself a new piano," which she did the Monday after the workshop. So that's an example of something that you may have done when you were younger, which gives you a hint of the sort of thing that you can do when in your life and retirement. For me, it's photography. Life's been too busy. I love taking photographs, but life gets too busy and we don't have time. The other one's dusting off the saxophone too. So anyway, think about, just again, I'll just give you a couple of minutes just to think about some activities that you enjoyed when you were younger, and if you can just write those in the workbook. Okay, we'll keep moving. I've just got one eye on my allotted time, and so we're pretty much on track now. So once again, hopefully that's given you a bit of a hint on some things that can help to keep you occupied in the next phase as well. So
Pete, you just need to move your microphone back down.
Oh, okay. Oh, so I do. Thank you. Sorry, I was having a cough before. Thanks, mate. Sorry. So okay. So yeah. So hopefully that's given you a bit of an idea, or some starting to think about that process of some activities you can do when you retire. Move on. Okay, so the next and the final exercise that we'll do is a bit of a taster. So this is giving you a bit of an idea of what we cover off in the workshop. So we work through 10 lifestyle areas, and they're in the workbook, so I don't need to read them out, but we work through each of those, and you'll see that they're loosely related to those keys to happiness: physical, mental health, social connections, and a sense of purpose in life. what we work through is we go through each of these activities, and we help you find new activities in each of these areas. And again, it's a process that you don't have to make set in stone decisions in the workshop, but it'll give you an idea on how to go about thinking about new ideas. And again, it's using that transition thinking and a balanced approach, which I've touched on already. So in the workbook, you'll see those 10 lifestyle areas. So Mark, if you just, yeah, thanks, mate. That's it. So what you need to look at is, and get out your pen. So firstly is the importance level. Consider how important each of these lifestyle areas will be to you in your life now. So let's just focus on how important they are now rather than retirement. But obviously, it's an exercise that we can do then as well. So how important is physical health, for example? And if you could mark that with an X. And again, I'll allow you a bit of time. You may not get all the way around the 10 lifestyle areas in the time I've got now, but that's okay. You can finish it off later as well. So once you've marked an X, you can do it either go around to all 10 of them with the X's, or for each of them, you can look at how important they are and then look at your satisfaction level, how satisfied you are with your level of activities to satisfy that. So if you're, have you got plenty of activities to keep you physically healthy? That's probably a pretty easy one if you're on the farm, but maybe if you look at the third one around their recreational and creative activities, do you have enough activities for recreation and creative? So how important is it? I'd suggest all of these are pretty important. How satisfied are you with your the activities you're doing now in satisfying in terms of recreational activities? So again, I'll just give you, so once you go through that exercise, and I will keep going given the time, what you'll notice is the bigger of the gap between the X and the 0, the more work you need to do to make sure that your life is going to be what you want it to be. So if recreational and creative activities are very important to you and you're not doing anything to satisfy that now, then you need to find new activities for recreation and creative activities, like photography or playing the saxophone for me, for example. Ditto with family and with your spouse or significant other in your life, where you're going to live, social connections and so on. Spirituality and faith, some people that's not very important to at all, and that's fine too. So so you don't need to worry about that. And volunteer and philanthropy, I find a lot of people are looking to add back to in the next phase as well. All right, so that's something that you can go on with in time. All right, so yeah, the next slide then. So what we're really encouraging people to do in the workshop is to the next one, thanks Mark, is to dream a little. And I think I mentioned this in one of the earlier sessions. We're all busy doing things that we have to do at the moment. So rather than doing things that we have to, what things would we want to do? And for me, it's playing the saxophone and taking photos. I'm not very good at either at the moment, but it's a target for me. So, and there are other things, making a difference. I'm on the board of a homeless centre in Brisbane, and that gives me it's a very rewarding exercise to be able to provide, to help them with my commercial and legal skills to help them to develop and grow the centre, which is working. So yeah, so let's think about how we might leave a legacy along the way. Okay, so just to reiterate the steps in the workshop, we really do take the time to plan. We teach an easy to follow step-by-step process, and it's really about working out what you really want to do in life. The brainstorming, as I've said, is an important part of the process, and we provide a lot of resources and a lot of ideas. So look at those 10 lifestyle areas. We've assembled over many years a number of possible activities in those areas, and it's amazing how often people look and say, oh yeah, I hadn't thought about that, well that's a good idea, and oh yeah, I used to do that. So it's the resources to help you actually find new activities and the environment with others who are in the same sort of process, which I think works very well. Now, I've actually put some testimonials on the slides. I'll just read one of those. We all have thoughts about what and when we're going to do things. The workshop helped me to structure my thoughts and organise these into something more cohesive. I won't read the others, but they're on our website if you want to go to our website, which is www.transitionplan.com.au. Okay, so my time is almost up. So I just want to reiterate those key messages. If you're struggling with moving on, then you're not on your own for all the reasons we've talked about, procrastinating being a key one of those. But just remember, it's not just about you. For again, and Mark's examples that he gave earlier are classic cases and very common ones of people who really don't think about the impact of their lack of decisions is having on other people. That next phase in life could be 25 years, so it's important that we spend the time to create new activities, to replace our existing activities, to make sure that we satisfy those keys to happiness. And we can help you with a unique process to create your new life. And finally, the challenge is take a new perspective on that future and dream a little and think about things that you want to do rather than things you want to do. So hopefully those exercises will give you a bit of an idea of just how to think about some different approaches to the next phase, and will encourage you to move past the procrastination and get on with it. Thanks, Mark. Back to you.
Good on you, Peter. Thank you very much for your presentation today. And I didn't realise you were a saxophonist.
Saxophonist.
Saxophonist. That was
I'm not a very good one, so.
You and Bill Clinton.
Well, you know what? That's actually what encouraged me, because I remember at his inauguration ball, he got up and played the saxophone. So what was that, 1992? And I thought, bugger it, if Bill Clinton can do it, so can I. So that's when that was the thing that started me learning. So when I lived at Yeronga on 3/4 of an acre, I had the room, but in an apartment in New Farm, it's not so easy. So I bought an electronic sax, but it's gathering dust at the moment. But there's a plan there.
No, good on you, Peter. I'm sure the neighbours are glad you're using the electronic one.
Absolutely.
No, that's good, Pete. Thanks for your contribution. And look, I really want to encourage. As I say, I've been going through and dealing with a few people recently where, Peter, you are really needed. And the trouble is that people don't. When you get to that age, you don't realise that you're actually standing in the way. And even though they were given the opportunity, I'm looking at all these families that I'm dealing with. They were all given an opportunity at a young age to take over. Yep. But the power becomes a little compelling.
Yeah. That's it. Yeah.
All the things that you talk about. So
yes.
I really commend, Peter, what you do, and certainly I'll be talking to some of those people about coming to see you. So
yeah, great. All right, thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Pete.
Okay, we'll see you all on Wednesday night. Yep, thanks, mate.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Which raises a question. Everyone, Wednesday night is question and answer night. So the issues that Peter was talking about there, please make sure that if you've got any questions you want to ask of Peter personally or incognito, whichever, please get those onto the chat roll. And it's gone quiet, the chat roll. So is everyone still out there? I just want to make sure you guys are still paying attention and putting things in the chat. We like to know that whether they're nuggets, things that one of the presenters have said, which makes you go, wow, that's a great idea. Please share that with others, because sometimes you may hear something that you think is an absolute nugget to you. Somebody else mightn't have heard what was said, and by you writing it down as a nugget, you're actually sharing with the other attendees something that you've got of real value, which they may pick up on if you write it down. So please encourage you to do that. So our next presenter is Peter McVeigh, then Michael Cowley after that. Peter so I'll welcome Peter in. Hey, Pete, how you going?
Good, Mark. How are you?
you're the good-looking McVeigh, I've heard.
There's not too many of us around. I was just wondering, with the presenters, they're actually doing them alphabetical order. Peter McNulty, Peter McVeigh, is that how it's rolling?
No, I wasn't thinking about it that deeply, Peter, but thank you. But Pete's going to talk today about the big issues, and I'm getting him on a bit early, so I hope that's good. The big issues for rural families to take advantage of strategies and so on to reduce tax and maximise and increase their wealth on and off the farm. So, Pete, over to you, and I'll bring your slides up.
Great, thank you, Mark. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, everyone, to just have a chat around I suppose, financial advice in relation to your succession planning process. So for those people who haven't met me or seen me speak before, my name's Peter McVeigh. I've got a background in agriculture. I have a Bachelor of Agricultural Economics and a Bachelor of Banking and Finance, and been a financial advisor for over nearly a quarter of a century, which is scary when I think about it. So, and as Mark said, if you've got any questions through the presentation, please send them through on the chat to Mark, and hopefully that you get a little bit out of the discussion today. So next slide. Thanks, Mark. So just a bit of compliance stuff, talking all things financial. This is just what we call general advice only. So please don't run out and act on any of the information I'm providing today. So it's not personal advice. So if you do need personal financial advice, please go and see an authorised financial advisor and discuss what your needs are with them. But what we're just talking about today is general advice, and you can't rely on that for your own personal situation. So as I said, I've got a long family history in agriculture. So that photo there, it's not a photo I've taken off the internet. It's actually a photo of my great-grandfather and great-grandmother, Patrick and Hester McVeigh, who migrated out from Ireland in the mid-1800s and established a farming operation just outside of Warwick, a place called Swan Creek. So it's a photo of Patrick sitting there on the left, and Hester, and I assume some of my great uncles within that family. And so that slide there, that's Hester in the middle, and that's 9 of her 11 surviving children. So Patrick and Hester had 11 kids all up. They had a 6-month-old died, and a 9-year-old died of whooping cough. So I suppose the thing around that photo is that, you know, rural succession and planning for succession has been an issue for all farming families for a very long period of time. And if we go to the next slide, thanks, Mark. And it's been an issue for a long period of time, and this is actually Patrick's will. That's his actual will that he did up in the early 1920s. So it became apparent that Patrick, I assume, it's sort of not a lot of details around what happened back then, but by the timeline, it obviously became apparent that Patrick wasn't going to be of this earth much longer, and they quickly did up a will, and Patrick, I think, passed away 6 months post that will being drawn up. And so you can imagine with 9 children and a wife, a surviving wife in Hester, that the farming enterprise, which I assume was reasonably big by those standards back then, had to sort of cater for a lot of different people, but all they had was the farming enterprise, and there was no other sort of what we call or farm assets or silos of wealth or farm. And as it's very complicated or convoluted when you go through that will, it's, you know, obviously provisions made for Hester as a surviving spouse, and then divvy up at the land and payments to daughters who are no longer on the farm. And so it is convoluted, and it is a little bit sort of constrained by the fact that they just have the one asset to deal with, I suppose, or the farming enterprise to deal with, and multiple beneficiaries to satisfy in that process. So with that as well, one lesson out of that is that, you know, time is your friend. If you're going to do succession planning and your estate planning, working with your estate planners, make sure you're doing it sooner rather than later. I think Patrick and Hester left themselves 6 months to get this all organised, and it probably shows in that documentation there. So if you go to the next slide, thanks, Mark. So as we said, with all the rural families that we help in relation to, I suppose, creating wealth and making sure they're not paying enough tax, and also that dovetails into succession planning and estate planning. And you just heard Peter talk about, you know, what life is looking like after you hang up the boots. And also, you know, Mark will assist you with a lot of these questions too around having those discussions and getting that to the forefront. But the big issues that we see on our client base, our rural families, is, you know, mum and dad, what sort of life are they going to leave when they hang up the boots, and how do they finance that, and what are the best ways to finance that? A discussion around who transitions to the farm, which kids will stay and work on the farm and essentially inherit the farm after mum and dad are no longer here. And then also, what sort of legacy are the family going to leave to those kids who are no longer working on the farm or have established themselves external to the farming enterprise? So that's traditionally the issues that we come across, and hopefully provide some solutions to those questions. So obviously, talking to Peter and Mark in that process, you know, one of the things you do need to do is have a plan, and also what success looks like to you. So what does succession planning success look like to you and to your family? So no planning process is going to be the same for each individual family. So as we see with Hester and Patrick, a lot of kids, a very convoluted outcome in relation to the estate and the planning process. But one thing, so success is going to look different to different farming families. But one thing that we find is common in the most successful succession planning discussions or plans is, go back to that slide, thanks, Mark, is the concept of having financial flexibility. So it's common, and it's not saying this is sort of a fault, but it's just natural, right, that farming families built up the farm and, you know, reinvest back in the farm, make decisions about the farm. And more often than not, there's not much discussion around, you know, do we build up other assets outside of the farm? So when we talk about financial flexibility, it's having optionality, which is a finance term. It's a bit of a nerdy finance term, and it's essentially the technical explanation of optionality is the value of an additional investment opportunities available only after having made the initial investment. So, you know, investing in the family farm, what other investments have you made post that? And essentially it just means having more options. And, you know, one of the things we discuss, and as I say, one of the things we find with the most successful succession solutions is ability to create all farm wealth or have all farm assets. So next slide, thanks, Mark. So when we're talking about financial flexibility, it does need, you know, longer term thinking. So in the presentation we did a few weeks ago, I talked about that concept of, you know, working on the farm or working on the business as opposed to working in the business. So, you know, your day-to-day decision making can be driven by what needs the immediate response in relation to, you know, what do we plant next year, what sort of fertilizer are we going to use, what cattle we're going to sell off or send to sale this next week. So really sort of you get caught up working in the business, and where we see once again the best solutions around succession planning is when people have got their head out of the water and thought a bit long term and made decisions based on the long term outcomes with that view, or we need to have more optionality when we come to the point end of the farming succession discussion. And essentially what that needs is just having a strategy and sticking to that strategy. And that's where the advice or the planning of a financial advisor can help in formulating that strategy and helping you keep account to that strategy, bearing in mind the vagaries, as we all know, of the risks around, you know, farming and also farming income and how that can affect a strategy in the short term, but having a long-term strategy and trying to stick to that. So those are the sort of three big issues we've seen. And what are the three big strategies we put in place or have discussions with our farming families? You know, the first one is, you know, when do we start, which I'll talk about, and, you know, where do we put that off farm asset, and not sort of particularly talking about, you know, where do we buy residential property, but it's more around, you know, structures and entities and how that fits in with your estate planning, but also your tax planning as well in relation to building up those all farm assets as well. and then have a quick brief discussion on why you'd actually want to do that or consider that strategy. So we go to the next question, next slide. Thanks, Mark. You there, Mark? Yep, there we go. So this is a quote from Warren Buffett. So for those of you who don't know, Warren Buffett's a bit of an investment guru based in the States. He runs a business called, Berkshire Hathaway. And, one of my favorite quotes from him is, someone is sitting in the shade of a tree today because someone planted a tree a long time ago. And that's in relation to, starting your investment process. There's no time like today to start that process. And the longer you have in building up all farm assets, the better the outcome will be. So if we go to the next slide, Mark. And the reason for that is, compounding and volatility. So compounding is a concept around when your investment or farm or any investment in reality, and the same with your on-farm investment, is that it will have a return, and you'll reinvest that back into that investment, and therefore you'll have more capital for next year's return. And that compounding effect of reinvesting back into the investment is very powerful over a period of time. And it's sort of the secret to investing is just using that compounding to reinvest that capital, to have more capital to invest next year. And also having a longer time reduces the market volatility. So if you go to the next slide, Mark, we'll just talk a little bit about market volatility. I've got this slide in a couple of more slides in the future, so I'm using this twice today. But if we have a look there, that's just a portfolio, the bar graphs there of a portfolio of well-known shares that are listed on the market. And when you're looking at having an investment or farm, it may not be just all shares. It could be, residential property. Depending on your risk profile, there might be a bit of fixed interest, might be cash. So please don't take this as that's what we would normally recommend, but it's just to display that compounding effect of market returns and volatility over time. So there's shares in there like Commonwealth Bank, Amcor, Telstra, Woolworths, Woodside Petroleum. So they're big businesses. They're not risky businesses, and that's the thing around the share market, is that they're big businesses. There is the risky end of the market, but over a period of time, that volatility, which we all know in commodities in any market, be it cotton, beef, prices will go up and down, as will equity prices will go up and down. But we can see over the long term that if you invested, I haven't been able to update this graph, so it's a little bit out of date, but 20 years ago, if you invested $1 million and let that build up over time, that would be worth just over $3.6 million in today. So that's the effect of compounding, of those businesses growing, producing a return and reinvesting back into the market. And we also see with that top line, that's the market volatility over time. That's the share market, that dark blue line. We can see over that 20 years, it has been up and down like the proverbial yo-yo, but the time that you've invested in the market has been able to reduce that volatility, that the growth has been there. So we have the other saying that, it's time in the market, it's not trying to time the market. If you go to the next slide, thanks, Mark. So just the next discussion on where we invest. So what, and this is more around, as I say before, tax structures. So when we talk to our clients around where to put their off-farm assets or their investments off-farm, and we will work with your estate planner as well in relation to testamentary trust. But this slide is just to get more around the concept of why we would use certain structures, and it really is a tax-driven concept. So you can have the best return in the world, but if you're paying too much tax, your after-tax return is going to be impacted by your investment performance. So essentially, if you're investing in your own name, as we all know, the top marginal tax rate is 47%. So if you get a great return, you're going to be giving half of that way to your silent partner in Canberra. Same with family trusts. Obviously, they've got to distribute earnings throughout the year, and that's to the beneficiaries. So the tax rate there can be as high as 47%. The Labor government's looking to put in a flat tax rate, or discussing having a 30% flat tax on family trusts to try to avoid some of the tax planning that can go in relation to family trusts, and company tax rate is 30%. And then when we get down to superannuation, so superannuation is sort of, I think, misunderstood out there in the general public, in that essentially it is not an investment, it's just a structure to hold your investments. So when people say, well, how's my super gone? It's like it's a concept that's an investment in itself, but it is just a tax structure to hold those investments. And the reason that it becomes appealing when we're talking around building off-farm assets, and also in relation to retirement planning or financing your retirement, is it's a really concessionally taxed rate. So it's sort of sounds like a stupid question, but is your assets going to last longer if it's taxed at 47% or at 15%, and then potentially at 0% when that superannuation fund goes to paying a pension? So when the super goes to pension phase, and that just means that that super fund starts paying out a pension to the beneficiaries, just like a family trust would pay out money to the beneficiaries of the family trust, the superannuation fund pays out a pension or an income stream to the beneficiaries. And as soon as it does that, all assets within the super fund get taxed at 0%. So any income, any capital gains, all at 0%, and any distribution is taxed at 0% at the hands of the beneficiary. So obviously, if you have that structure, it'd be quite attractive to try to get as much funds into that as possible to be able to finance your retirement when it comes to hanging up the boots. The other benefit of that too, if you're holding direct shares with franking credits, more often than not, particularly with our clients, because we go more for direct assets as opposed to unitised trust, they'll get a tax refund back from the tax office nearly every year because of the franking credits that are paid out, the franking credits that are paid out of that. So that's why super and superannuation discussions become really powerful when we're talking to clients around planning for when they're not working full on in the farm. So there is a lot of convoluted rules and regulations around it. That's because obviously the government doesn't want everyone chucking a heap of money in there because it's so concessionally taxed. But that's the same with any tax environment. As I said before, family trusts, the Labor government's looking to put a flat tax rate of 30% on there. So they'll always be playing around with it, but that's our job as financial advisors, to take that heat off our clients and provide the best tax structuring possible for you, given your current situation. So the other thing around why off-farm assets. So in my experience with clients, and particularly rural clients, with building up off-farm assets, it actually kills two birds with one stone. So we go to the next slide, Mark. And that's the off-farm asset then, when it is of substance and has been invested in and built up over time, it does create a passive income for mum and dad when they do look to slow down. We never sort of call our clients, our rural clients, retiring, because they always have some sort of still active level of involvement in the business, or run a few cattle themselves. So while they're no longer actively involved in the farm and having an active income from their hands-on working in the farm, that off-farm asset, be it in super or whatever entity it is, will provide a passive income for mum and dad when they're no longer working. And then the other important aspect, particularly with our rural clients, not so much with our city-based clients, is that it creates a pool of assets, an additional pool of assets other than the assets in the farm, so that we can look at providing some sort of legacy for the kids who aren't on farm anymore. Your estate planners and Mark will talk about equal and equitable outcomes. So with farming assets being the value they are, we all know farming prices or property prices have increased. It's unlikely that we're going to get an equal outcome for each member of the family, but we can get an equitable outcome around that process. So just a little bit more on passive income. So this is mum and dad's income in retirement. And as I say, inverted commas, retirement. You're hanging up the boots or slowing down, whatever you'd like to call it. And the reason that having that off-farm asset, that silo of wealth, is good, as opposed to just relying on the farm, is that when mum and dad slow down, they're no longer exposed to the risk of the farm income. So we know that with commodity prices, weather, all that stuff can impact how successful a farm is from year to year. And having mum and dad exposed to that doesn't create, from our experience, a enjoyable retirement, and that they're still worried about what the farm is doing. And coupled with that, one of the classic solutions we see with a lot of clients is that the next generation will lease the farm off mum and dad will live off the lease payments to them. And that's putting pressure on the next generation, that they do feel obliged to make sure that mum and dad are looked after in that process. It puts another level of financial stress on the operation, and it puts a level of personal stress on the next on that next generation looking to finance mum and dad. So you remove that pressure on the next generation who feel obliged, and quite rightly, to look after mum and dad when they slow down. So that's the benefit of having that passive income, that all farm asset. So next slide, thanks, Mark. And just quickly on asset allocation. So when we see a lot of our clients, they've farm management deposits, a lot of cash sitting around. I was just talking to a client last week whose husband had passed away and had left her with all the assets and had been left in cash. And there wasn't much thought around asset allocation, getting exposed to growth assets, which we find a lot within our rural-based clients, and that a lot of cash being held. Now, the issue with that, particularly in a high inflation environment, although it might seem a risk-less solution, it is actually quite risky, in that inflation over time will eat away at your capital and your buying power. So we'll sit down and talk to you around getting the appropriate asset allocation, and you'll see in your workbooks there's a risk profiling questionnaire, and that's just for us to get more idea of what your comfort levels are with relation to investing and risk. And always, make the comment that I always had the opportunity to go back to our farming enterprise when I was a young bloke. I decided, no, I'll do something far less riskier. I'll get involved in the stock market. So although inherently we can think that farming enterprises are quite conservative, there is a lot of risk involved in running a farming exercise. So if we go back to that graph, thanks Mark, that we've had there before. Yep. So if we see there that that $1 million invested in cash, and that's that orange line going straight through there. That $1 million is still going to be $1 million in 20 years' time, but the downside there is the buying power of that $1 million is far less than what it was. Now, if we see just above that, obviously the $1 million is, if we invested in growth assets, it's risen to 3.6, but also the income generation ability of that $1 million. So it's changed a little bit now, obviously in the last 12 months when interest rates are increasing. But back 20 years ago, cash rates were probably around 8-9%. So that $1 million would have generated 80-90 grand. But there has been 2 decades of decreasing interest rates. So we see that light blue line. After 20 years, your $1 million is hardly generating anything for you. But in the growth assets, the lighter blue line would be generating just over $200,000 in income from initial investment. So that's why we do that risk profiling to get the appropriate level of risk that you can invest in, to make sure you're getting exposure to some growth assets so the income grows over time. So just a quick word on asset allocations there, and why growth assets are important in that process in relation to trying to generate an income from that all farm asset. So next slide, thanks, Mark. And the other thing, as I said before, is it creates a pool of assets or farm which can assist in that succession planning discussion with the kids. So if there's some kids coming back onto the farm, some kids that have gone off and established their careers external to the farm in either professions or trades or whatever, it does creates more an equitable outcome, I suppose, when mum and dad are no longer here. And I'm thinking of one of our clients in the South Burnett at the moment. That's exactly what they've done. Mum and dad have a self-managed super fund which creates an income for them. They have a couple of units in Harvey Bay, which will go to one of the beneficiaries of the estate, but the son who's stayed on the farm, worked on the farm, has developed the farm. He will inherit the farm when mum and dad are no longer here. The farm over the last 20 years has obviously gone up nearly exponentially in value, but the family is happy with that outcome because the other family member has gone off and established herself as a doctor in a rural community and is professional, but will get some recognition or a legacy from mum and dad in part when they have passed on. So it helps in that creating more of a cohesive transition when mum and dad have not here anymore. Next slide, thanks, Mark. So just in summary quickly, so as I said, when you're looking at this process, very rarely do we see, when mum and dad finally slow down, that the whole business is sold and there's a pool of assets to invest for them to enjoy their retirement. There is an inherent want in all our farming families to pass on that farming legacy to the next generation, for them to experience a lifestyle, for the grandkids to experience that lifestyle. But within that process, we can help setting those goals. How do you want to look at your retirement? What do you want to do in your retirement? As Peter McNulty was speaking about before, how do you finance what you want to do? When do you start that process? And then educating on what you're required to achieve those goals in relation to the amount of assets you need to generate the income you need to live off. And obviously, as we spoke before, around the entities and the tax structures that are going to achieve the best outcomes for you. We also work closely with your other advisors, be it your estate advisors, your accountants, and with Mark and his team there. So that's it for me, Mark. I hope that was enlightening and enjoyable for everyone. You got your mute on, Mark, which is unusual.
That's right. Thank you very much, Peter. I was just wondering why you have the top of your head cropped off on the video there. Was that just to hide your...
Maybe my camera's gone
Oh,
there we go.
I just thought you were trying to hide your haircut there.
Yeah, what haircut?
No, thanks, Peter. Yeah, it's great advice. In fact, I love listening to you guys talk as well, because there's so much wisdom in there for everyone. And interestingly, I think a lot of graziers, superannuation, it's not a dirty word, but they just don't go there because they have that tendency to always want to keep reinvesting in the farm and buying more land.
Yeah, that's right. Like we do see that, like I say, short-term decisions. So there is tax deductibility available to making contributions to super, but when it comes to sort of that tax-driven question, more often than not, well, let's take advantage of the instant asset write-off or buy some equipment for the farm, which is sort of a shorter-term solution, as opposed to thinking, well, we've got this spare cash, can we use that to build up a longer-term solution for us, which more often than not is going to be an issue in the years to come, that succession planning process. So,
yeah. No, thanks, Pete. Thanks for your time today. Look, I'm I know Michael's been sitting there dutifully waiting, so I'll bring Michael in early in a minute. So, Pete, thank you. We'll talk soon.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone.
See you Wednesday night. Look, I've just been looking at the chat roll, and the conversation seems to have died. So I'm going to resort to bribery and corruption. I've got a whole lot of little books here I've written over the years. Your Tactical Team, how to put that together. 7 Significant Will Killers. Documenting Your Intent. Very, very important little book, that one. Documenting Your Intent. Getting Your Peace of Mind Foundation in Place. 10 Fundamental Strategies to Create Your Greatest Legacy. The Tale of Two Scenarios. How simple actions made a huge difference with 2 different families. The Gist of the Plan. How you can get down and be succinct about what it is you're trying to create for everyone in the family. And finally, don't be like Harry. Now, that's not who you think it is. That's just some guy with a red beard. But don't be like Harry. In other words, don't pull the family apart. Have all the conversations and get all this stuff sorted well before the kids get married and things sometimes go awry. So the reason I'm showing you all those books we've got is I'd love to see some more comments, some more questions, some more nuggets in the chat. And Tori and Sue Ellen will be looking out for those who come up with the greatest nuggets, the greatest questions, or whatever in the chat roll. We want to keep that chat moving over, please, to show the engagement. And we can send out some of these books to people who ask some great questions. So on that, I'd like to introduce Michael Cowley. You just need to unmute yourself, Michael.
Hello, Mark.
How are you, Michael? Great to see you today. And Michael's going to talk for 25 minutes to 11:45 in regard to structuring and all things legal in regard to estate and succession planning. Thanks, Michael. I'll hand over.
Thanks, Mark. Yes, thank you, Mark. So as Mark said, I'm going to talk about structuring for estate and succession planning. First of all, I'd just like to comment, Mark, I didn't know you were the Barbara Cartland of succession planning. That's some impressive book history you've got there. But succession planning, structuring is a vital part of that. And what do I mean when I say structuring? So basically, we're talking about who owns the assets. You can go to your next slide, Mark. We're talking about who owns the assets. We're talking about who operates the business. We're talking about who borrows the money and who provides the security. So the structuring around who's doing all of those things. So if we go to the next slide, we can look at the Smith family, and that's an example family I showed in our earlier presentation, which I'm going to refer back to. So we've got mum and dad owning the property Blackacre. We've got mum, dad, and the daughter owning the property Whiteacre as joint tenants. We've got a partnership operating on those properties with mum, dad, the son, and the daughter, and mum and dad have borrowed all of the money for the purchase of those properties and also for partnership operations. So we'll come back to that family a little bit later on. As you can see there's so many alternatives into how you structure things. So we can have mum and dad, we could have children involved, we could have a partnership of any of those. We can also introduce a trust, a company, or a super fund into the structure. So with so many alternatives, how do you choose? So I just wanted to pass on the basic rules. So if we start at the basic rules of structuring, and that will then lead us to being able to figure out which entity we want to use. So I'll run through those today. First rule is siloing your assets or quarantining each asset from the risk of the other assets or other activities. We don't want you putting all of your eggs in the one basket. We want to make sure we have ease of future transfer. If we need to be able to hardwire the transfer of assets in the future so that just happens automatically on a given event. We want to make sure that we can be flexible in how we distribute income. We want to be able to manage the tax. So Peter spoke a bit about how we can manage the tax. We want to make sure that whatever our structure is, we don't lose access to our small business capital gains tax concessions, because they can be vital in a succession planning transfer or even on sale of a property. And if we get all of those rules right, then we can facilitate a much easier estate and succession planning. So I'm going to give away a key secret now. I think the secret weapon to structuring is the discretionary trust. Now, I just quickly wanted to run through how they work for people who aren't familiar with the trusts. So a trust will have a trustee who holds property, and they will hold that property on trust for the beneficiary. So the day-to-day control of the trust is held by the trustee. That can be an individual, so that could be mum or dad, or that could be a company. And if it's a company, then you're going to need directors who ultimately have the day-to-day control, and then you have shareholders who decide who the directors are. So the trustee controls the property for the benefit of the beneficiaries. Usually your beneficiaries is going to be all of your family and other companies and other trusts, so a wide class of beneficiaries. And another role in the trust then is an appointor. So the role of the appointor is to replace the trustee. So that's kind of like a little safety valve that you can have there if you need to regain control of the trust, if you somehow or other lose control of the trustee. So I'll be talking a little bit about trusts later on. I just wanted to give you a bit of an intro as to how they work. So let's start running through the basic rules and how they apply and what they mean. So the first rule was to silo your assets or quarantining the risk for asset protection. So you don't want to expose your underlying land wealth or your off-farm assets to your farming operations. That's where most of your risk is going to lie, in your farming activity. Because in your farming activity, you're going to be employing people, you're going to be operating machinery, you're going to be dealing with livestock, you're going to send people climbing up silos and driving road trains and carrying out all sorts of activities which are increasingly becoming regulated, like clearing vegetation and harvesting water for irrigation, all those sorts of things. So that's where your risk is. So your first step is to make sure you've removed the risk of that farming activity from your underlying asset holding wealth. A simple way to do that might be to hold the land in a separate discretionary trust, which is separate from your farming operations. You also want to look at whether you can separate different assets with different risk profiles. So you might have some farming land, nothing particularly risky about that. Then you might develop or you might purchase another block which has some accelerated risk or increased risk on it. So maybe there's some processing going on or some high intensive activity going on that title. Maybe you might think that lot is a little bit more risky than your other operations, so perhaps that needs to be held in a different entity. Or if you start investing off farm in commercial land or residential land, you might consider that there's a different risk profile for those different types of property. So maybe you want to hold those in a different entity, so they're not each asset's not exposed to the risk of the others. So that's our first rule. Our next rule then is not putting all your eggs in the one basket. So what I'm talking about there is that if you do decide to use a trust as part of your structure or a company or whatever it is, don't just use one to acquire all of your assets, because if you have all of your eggs in one basket, when it comes to succession planning or estate planning, you can only hand that basket to one person. So if you hand the one basket to all of the family, they then have to take the eggs out of that basket so they can each benefit from their own egg. But taking the property out of that entity may give rise to capital gains tax and stamp duty and other legal costs. So the solution would be to hold each standalone property or significant asset in its own trust. So then you can transfer Trust A off to one child and transfer Trust B off to another child without any capital gains tax or stamp duty. So that's all of our eggs in one basket. Our next rule then is you want your structure to be able to facilitate ease of future transfer. So kind of like all of your eggs in one basket, if you own all of your assets in the one entity, it's going to make it pretty hard to transfer those assets out separately to people in the future. If you own all of your property personally, the only way you can transfer that property in the future is to transfer the legal ownership of the title, which may give rise to stamp duty and capital gains tax, or to leave that property in a trust, or to leave the property under your will, which might be an issue if you're concerned that there's going to be a contest or some contention around your will. So once again, the solution would be to hold the property in a trust. If you want to transfer that during your lifetime, you then pass control of that trust over to the child who you intend to by either making them trustee or passing control of the company over to them as trustee. So there's no capital gains tax, there's no stamp duty. It's an easy solution. You can also, sorry, I'll just go back to the other slide, Mark. You see, in our slide, I mentioned that you have a trustee and you have an appointor. So you can progressively pass control over time if you do have the property in a trust. So you might make the child who you intend to receive it the trustee, so they have day-to-day control, but you can stay in the background as the appointor so that you're in there as a bit of a stopback safety valve. So if something goes wrong in the child's life, or if they start making some pretty rash decisions, you as the appointor can step in and remove them and put in a safe trustee. So you can progressively transfer control by using a trust. Then you might want to hardwire the transfer. So it might be part of your estate or succession plan that a particular property must go a particular way, and you're concerned there might be some risk. So how can you hardwire that transfer? Obviously, if you own the property in your own name, the only way you can hardwire the transfer is actually to physically transfer the property to them while you're alive, and you may not want to do that. You're not sure when you're going to peg out. So as to when you actually do that transfer, that's a bit difficult to choose the time. or alternatively, you leave it under your will. And as I said, if you've got some concern about there being some problems with the will, then leaving the property under will might be not the best option. Also, if you own the property in your own name and then you lose capacity, your attorneys can no longer implement any transfer you might have been intending while you're alive because they can't gift your property. So the solution might be to hold the property in a trust once again. The trust deed can be hardwired to nominate who the person is who's going to take control. So it might say that mum and dad are going to be the appointor, but if both mum and dad die and lose capacity, then we want child A to become the appointor. Child A being the appointor can then remove the trustee and appoint themselves in there as trustee. And there's no real way for anyone to challenge that passing of control. So we can hardwire that by using a trust. That's subject to the warning in New South Wales. In New South Wales, there's a thing called notional estate, where trusts and trust assets can be considered part of the estate, but trust can still be quite a valuable structuring alternative in New South Wales. So the next rule that we talked about in structuring is to make sure that we've got flexible income distribution. So if you're like the Smith family and you own the property in your own name and you own the farming operation in a partnership, then all of the income and any out of those assets or the farming operation and any capital gain on a sale has to go to the owners in their ownership shares. So if you wanted the income to go to anyone else, you'd have to take the income in your name, pay the tax on it, and then distribute what's left out to the other family members. If you own the property, once again, if you own the property in a trust and you sell the property, you can distribute the capital gain from that sale to anyone in that wide class of beneficiaries. And if you're carrying on your farming activity in the trust, once again, you can distribute the income from that farming activity to anyone in that wide class of beneficiaries. So the trust really gives you that flexibility that holding and operating businesses individually doesn't. You need to make sure that your structure manages tax and allows access to your capital gains tax concessions. So that flexibility of income distribution will allow you to manage the tax because you can distribute to whichever beneficiary has the best tax profile. And Peter talked about the different tax rates for different entities. So by introducing some of those entities into your structure, you might be able to access some lower tax rates. If your farming operation has got to such a size that you can't manage the tax by distributing to the individuals, then you need to consider incorporating a company into your structure so you can access that 25% tax rate. Obviously, you need to be talking to your accountant fairly closely before making any of these sorts of decisions, but they're there and they're available. When we're talking about off-farm assets, obviously you've got the tax-friendly environment of a superannuation fund. So they can be quite helpful in building up your off-farm wealth, as Peter's already mentioned. I would say beware of owning land in a company because you do lose access to the 50% individual tax rate. The 50% discount for capital gains tax for an individual. So if mum and dad own the farm and sell it, they straight away get a 50% discount on the capital gains tax because they're individuals. Same thing applies if the land's held by a trust. But if the land's held by a company, you don't get access to that 50% discount. So you need to do a lot of modelling to make sure that the tax you save by owning it in a company over the life of the asset is going to outweigh the loss of that 50% discount. So let's now look at the Smith family and see how they go with our basic rules. So as far as asset protection and quarantining or siloing assets, we've got a fail here. A risky activity carried on by the partnership. We've got all of the partners in a partnership jointly and severally liable. So that means any one partner can be responsible for all of the debts and all of the liabilities of the partnership. So we've got all of our rural property, all the farming property is exposed to the risk of the farming operations. We've also got Whiteacre being exposed to anything else that's going on in the daughter's life. So if she's got a business that she's provided a personal guarantee for, or if that business fails or she has creditors, then her interest in Whiteacre is going to be exposed. And also, if she separates from a spouse and she has a property settlement, well, then her 1/3 share of Whiteacre is going to be exposed. So complete fail on that test because we've got no asset protection, no quarantining at all. Let's see how we've gone on the next rule. Any ease of future transfer. So no, mum and dad own the property in their own names. If they're going to transfer it, we're going to have to make sure that we can access any stamp duty exemptions or capital gains tax exemptions. Not saying you're not going to be able to access them. You may be able to, but it's going to take time and more cost to make sure that we do. And in some cases, you just can't access the concessions. So it's not a given that that will happen. Also, not easy to deal with the daughter's share in the property because she owns a 1/3 share of that property. And it's up to her what she does with that 1/3 share. So if she decides she doesn't like the family plan, she can just hang on to her 1/3 share. And we've also got mum, dad, and the daughter holding Whiteacre as joint tenants. So there's no certainty of future transfer there for us, or there's difficulty in getting certainty of future transfer. Because if mum and dad die, then the daughter takes all of Whiteacre as the surviving joint tenant. So that might make our estate planning pretty difficult if part of the plan is not for the daughter to get all of Whiteacre. Mum and dad have to leave their interest in the land and the partnership via their wills, so we're exposed to potential will contests there if the son and the daughter aren't happy with what the plan is. And as I mentioned, the daughter holds a 1/3 share in Whiteacre, so any co-owner can call for a sale of the property at any time. So if she decides she doesn't want to be involved in the farming anymore, she can force a sale of Whiteacre and is entitled to 1/3 of those sale proceeds. Obviously, because the 1/3 share in Whiteacre is her asset, she can leave that in her will, however she wishes. So we don't have a lot of control over what happens with that asset if somehow or other we get the daughter offside or if she just hasn't done her own planning. So the next rule then was flexible income distribution and tax management. So we don't really have any flexibility here. All of the partners have to take their income in their partnership share, so they're all taking a quarter share. If any property is sold, then the sale proceeds need to go to the owner in their ownership shares. And as I said before, if the daughter sells, if Whiteacre sold, then she's entitled to her 1/3 share, even though she may not have contributed to the purchase price at all. So no flexibility at all in distributing income or managing any tax for the Smith family. So not looking very good as far as ideal structuring for estate and succession planning. So let's look at some of the estate planning issues that the Smith family might have. So let's assume mum and dad either have a simple enduring power of attorney or worse, no enduring power of attorney at all. And mum and dad both lose capacity. So let's assume that both of the children are the attorneys or they get appointed to be the administrators. They're going to be controlling all of the property on behalf of mum and dad. Now, there's a rule that attorneys cannot benefit from what they're doing. And in Queensland, there's also an assumption that if an attorney is involved in a transaction with the principal, then there's assumed to be undue influence on their part. So any transaction they enter into can be invalidated. So it's almost going to be impossible for them to continue to operate the partnership because anything they do, they will benefit from because they are a partner. And any transaction they enter into on behalf of the partnership, they're also entering into with themselves. So they're probably going to have to go to court to get a court order to allow them to do anything, which will completely hamstring all of the partnership operations. The attorneys also the children won't be able to expand the farming business at all because the only way they can do that is to borrow and secure debt. They're not going to be able to secure any debt against mum and dad's interest in the property because that's not in mum and dad's best interest. Mum and dad's wealth is not increased by someone securing a mortgage over their asset. So having a simple enduring power of attorney or no enduring power of attorney at all will basically paralyze the farming operation and will stop the kids from expanding. So the lesson there is make sure you have a modern enduring power of attorney with all of the provisions in there which allow these sorts of transactions to continue. Let's assume mum and dad have simple wills because the lawyer said, just do a simple will, not worth the money, just leave everything to the kids, all to each other and everything to the kids if you both pass away. That'll be pretty simple. So if we go back and think about the structure, remembering that Whiteacre was owned by mum and dad and the daughter as joint tenants. So if mum and dad both die, the daughter ends up with Whiteacre, all of it. The only thing that's in the estate then is Blackacre and mum and dad's half share of the partnership. So the son and the daughter each get a half of Blackacre and a half of the partnership. And you'll remember that all of the debt was in mum and dad's name because they originally had a loan in their name, and when they went to buy Whiteacre, they thought, oh, the easiest thing is just for the bank to keep dealing with us, so we'll just borrow that all in our own name. The effect from an estate planning point of view is that when mum and dad die, all of that debt is then goes with the property to the son and the daughter. So the son will end up with half of Blackacre and the partnership, less half of the debt, whereas the daughter gets that amount plus all of Whiteacre. So a simple will for mum and dad in the Smith family situation would be a disaster. So the lesson there is to make sure that you get modern wills drafted, taking into full account all of your assets and all of your debts and liabilities. And that's why it's so important to go through the due diligence process. That's why we go through that process. That's why Mark encourages you as part of his process to go through due diligence, because that's when we learn these sorts of things, and so we can change the wills to make sure that we're catering for these sorts of things, or maybe even get rid of the joint tenancy altogether. Another little lesson there is with partnerships, if you don't have a partnership deed which specifically allows for it, on the death of a partner, usually the partnership will dissolve, so there'll no longer be a partnership. And then the bank will often freeze those bank accounts until the estate is administered. So if you do have a partnership, make sure you've got a partnership deed which provides the partnership will continue on the death of one of the partners, so that you don't have your farming operation frozen if we lose one of the partners. Also, sorry, Mark, we'll just go back to what happens if the daughter dies. So you'll remember mum and dad have passed away. Daughter ends up with all of Whiteacre and half of Blackacre and half of the partnership. So if the daughter dies and she's got a simple will in place, then we end up with her spouse getting all of Whiteacre and half of Blackacre and half of the partnership. So once again, absolute disaster for the family. So that's why it's so important to spend the time getting your estate planning right. And it's why it's so important to get your structuring right to make your estate planning that much easier and that much more certain and secure. Okay, so what could the Smith family do? So the next slide sets out a suggested structure. So if the intention was that one child gets Blackacre and one child gets Whiteacre, then ideally Blackacre would have been owned by one trust. We would have a company as trustee for that trust. We would have one person as director of that company. Now, the reason we want to have only one director there is because directors can be exposed to liability as directors. So we want to limit the number of people who are exposed to that liability. So we'll choose dad to go in there as the director. We'd have mum and dad as joint shareholders, mum and dad as joint appointors. So whilst dad has day-to-day control of that trust, the joint underlying control is held equally between mum and dad. And the same with the Whiteacre Trust. We have a separate trust owning Whiteacre. You can use the same company as trustee. The Rolls-Royce would be to have a separate company to make it easy to pass control separately one from the other. So when it comes time for a succession planning transfer, and mum and dad want to transfer the properties onto the next generation, all they need to do is transfer control of Blackacre Trust to, say, the son, and control of Whiteacre Trust to the daughter. There's no capital gains tax, there's no stamp duty. That transfer is done relatively easily without a lot of cost. And if you were concerned about someone challenging the will, you could even hardwire those trust deeds so that when mum and dad died or lost capacity, we have the nominated child automatically taking control of those assets. So once again, caveat for New South Wales, might not work 100% for New South Wales, but it's going to work in our other jurisdictions. Then what do you do about your farming activity? Well, you can have that either in a trust or a company. Once again, need to do that in conjunction with the accountant to make sure we have the tax issues covered off on there. But because we don't have all 4 people carrying on the partnership, we don't have all 4 people exposed to those risks and liabilities. And you'll see I've nominated Dad there as the director, so that he's the only one exposed to those director liabilities. That means if there is a disaster in the farming activity and somehow or other liability does trace its way back up to the director, we've only got Dad exposed to that risk and not the entire family. You'll see I've got some red lines there. What I'm talking about there is who actually borrows the money for those assets. So another way to limit or to increase your asset protection and to increase your ability to transfer assets easily in the future is to have separate loans, separate loan facilities for each asset. So I propose you'd have a separate loan for Blackacre and a separate loan for Whiteacre, so that when you transfer Blackacre, that it's only Blackacre's debt which is going with that asset, and the same with Whiteacre. I would also propose that the farming entity have its own borrowings, because we have had instances where our family farming operation has had significant debts and had to be liquidated. Unfortunately, the farming entity had borrowed all of the money and then lent it to the property owning trusts. What that meant was that when the farming entity was wound up, it had to call on those internal loans. So the property owning trusts had to repay those loans back to the farming trust, which then resulted in the sale of all of the family assets. Whereas if the farming entity had have only borrowed its own funds, then effectively we could let the farming entity go. It goes broke. It can't, and the landholding entities are still safe and secure. So the bank would have been willing to support the family if they could have protected those landholding assets. So that's our possible solution. However, if you're not there, it's never too late. With enough time and enough forward planning, then there's often things that we can do to get you into the right position. But you need to start, and you need to start now. The longer you leave it, the harder it's going to be. So there's lots of different strategies we can use to get you into a much better position to assist you in your estate and succession planning. And I've listed a few different things we've used there. I know I've probably running out of time, Mark. The next slide then is my little caveat. Like Peter says, this is all general advice. Don't do anything unless you actually go and get specific legal advice for your own position. Lots of resources on our website. We have email updates. Look at those. Please get your questions into the chat. I'd love to be able to respond to some questions. Structuring can be a really complicated process. It's something that we love doing here at Fox and Thomas because there's so many different ways to do it, and each family is going to have a different solution. But the sooner you start, the sooner you can get yourselves into a great position for your future estate and succession planning. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Michael. Very sage advice as usual. Appreciate very much. I'm a little disappointed you compared me to Barbara Cartland.
I meant you're a prolific writer, Mark. You've got.
That's because I got all these books, doesn't it? Covers don't look the same as the ones she writes.
I'm sure they're just as racy in the middle there somewhere, Mark.
No, they're not. No, Michael, thank you. You know, that's it's such a deep topic in regard to structuring and so on, and you're handling it really well. And we had people asking me to expand the slides. I'm sorry, I took a couple of minutes, but it's not that they didn't want to see you, Michael. They just wanted to see what the slides were referring to. So, but no, thank you. Thanks once again. And as I say, please keep the questions coming in. Michael will be back on Wednesday evening to Queensland time. It's easier for you, Michael. It's only 5:30.
And the questions are the fun part. The questions are the fun part, aren't they, Mark? Where we can really sort of, get into some ideas. So that, please get your questions in. We love dealing with them. Yeah, absolutely. But look, I meant to ask Peter, what's this new word that he invented called optionality? I've never heard of it before, but he keeps throwing that in, and I forgot to ask him before he left. But, if you use a discretionary trust in your structuring, you'll have optionality as well, Mark. So it works everywhere. I better go Google this word. Okay. No, thanks, Michael. Look forward to it, and look forward to catching up with you again on Wednesday night. Thanks for your contribution again. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everybody. See you.
No, that's good. And look, Michael's just really he's really all over this structuring and so on. In fact, the first time Michael and I met, he was speaking out at Goondiwindi at a workshop out there, and you know, the engagement by all the people who are at the workshop was testament to the fact that this is something that Michael does very, very well as part of the whole process of estate and succession planning, is making sure you do have the structures right. But I sort of moved quickly between Peter and Michael because they're all sitting there waiting. But there was a couple of things I just wanted to touch on before I introduce the next speaker, Stephen Lutz, who he must be in the background there somewhere, I hope, Tori. But the issues I wanted to just touch on were, you know, the whole concept of this master plan process that we use for the estate and succession planning, and that is that you know, there's many people speaking as part of this the workshop, and now with the forum, you've got 9 professional advisors. You know, there's a couple of solicitors, a couple of financial planners, and other people who are very, very capable and who we utilise on many occasions, and very grateful for having their experience and their expertise. And the whole process, the whole Rural Succession Solutions master plan process, is all about me taking people through a process, and it all starts with great questions. And you know, it's understanding what people want to achieve, what their vision is for themselves, for their family, what their intentions are. You know, one of those little books I held up before was this one, Documenting Your Intent. And I've said before too, that's all about starting with the heart, understanding what's in the heart for those that you love and those that you care for. So basically my role is to start the whole process with you, to take you through, to ask you the questions, find out what's really important to you, and then match you up with the right advisors to where required as we move through the process. So for example, you know, if you don't have an elderly parent who's sort of delaying handing down the farm to the next generation, you know, the transition part's not needed, and so on. And it's our role to make sure that you're not spending money where you don't need to spend it, and we can get it done in the most effective and an efficient way. And so with our new master plan process, it's our intent that this is all sorted for you within 90 days from start to finish. I wanted to touch on, Steve, good to see you waiting in the background there. Good to have you there. But there was one other issue which I raised in a way before, but I just want to touch on it a little bit more. And that's why I only deal as part of our process. So when clients engage me to take the journey with them through getting their estate and succession planning done, the whole process, I only deal with experts. I only deal with people who this is what they do. They're not general practitioners. They don't do a bit of this and a bit of that and a bit of something else. They focus and they specialize in estate and succession planning, or in communication, or whatever it is, depending on the role that's required. And that was really apparent, as I said, in Rockhampton over the last couple of days when I met those people who basically said they'd been to their local accountant. He'd taken them to the solicitor, the local solicitor, and they were happy they had plans in place. And you know what? I'm going to say good on them, because they're miles ahead of most people, because they've actually done something. But, you know, for the sort of wealth that they had and the children that were involved, the number of children and the amount of wealth that was involved, they really needed to go to specialists to get proper advice. So like I say, you know, if you've got a serious illness in your body, you don't go to you go to a GP, but you go to a GP to get the referral onto the specialist. And you know, these people were asking me questions, and as I said, they didn't have any testamentary trusts in their wills. Their lawyer hadn't thought to ask them about testamentary trusts, including those, or he mightn't have known how to do that properly. And there is a right and a wrong way to put testamentary trusts in place. There was no asset protection. There was no communication with other family members. All the wealth had been transferred to the son, so mum and dad didn't own anything anymore, and that left them at huge risk. If the son goes broke, where does that leave mum and dad? Well, you know, all these sorts of issues, and like a proper serious operation, if your life was at risk, we treat estate and succession planning exactly the same way. So all the people that we've got on this board that you're watching in the forum and you watched in the workshop, These are people who are specialists in their own specific area. None of them do the other, apart from the fact we've got 2 solicitors and 2 financial planners. Each of them are in specific specialties, and that's how I like to provide advice to clients. Look, we do use your accountant. If you came on board with us on a working with us basis, yeah, we use your accountant because we need all that sort of information, and they're a wealth of knowledge, and they understand all your structures, have copies of all your documents, and a very important part of it. Excuse me, but accountants generally aren't succession planning experts. They're accountants, and we like to fit everyone in to make sure they just stick to their specialty. And certainly with solicitors, I've said many times, there's probably 2 to 3% of lawyers in Australia know how to do estate and succession planning properly in regard to asset protection. And when you've got a lot of wealth, as all the people who are on this call have, it's important that you make sure you treat that seriously. So we don't. If someone has, I specialise in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 on their door, we don't generally work with them because they aren't specialists. They're GPs at everything. And also, when you use your like these people the other day, when you use your existing person, your existing accountant, solicitor, it's not a second set of eyes. It's there's no independence. They're not going to criticise something they've done. So if you were getting a second opinion on all your legal structures and you wanted to use a guy that had put those structures into place, he's not going to criticise his own work, is he? So we like to get a second opinion for you on these sorts of issues. And certainly when you're having communication with family members, I think it's very important that you also have someone from outside the family, outside a relationship, so you don't have someone who's known the whole family for 20 years trying to have conversations because they're biased. Anyone who's known the family for a long time is going to be biased towards the way they know the family as it stands at the moment. Anyway, thanks, Michael, for talking about structuring and so on. Please keep going with the questions. So I'm not looking at the moment, but we've got a heap of books there, and I'd love to give them all away. And for anyone who asks some good questions, the girls will let me know, and we'll send those out. So get your questions in, please, for Wednesday night on either the chat or through email. Remember, this is your plan. This is your future. So whatever you do, you've invested to be here, and we're providing the best quality speakers and so on as part of this process. This is all about you. It's all about your future. So please take this seriously for the sake of your family. As Peter McNulty has said, and I love the quote, this isn't actually about you. It's about everyone else that gets left behind when you go. So I know you love and care for those people. So I know you'll take this seriously. So Stephen, I'm going to, Stephen adding you in right now. Good to see you, Steve. Can't hear you. Just can't hear you at the moment, but anyway, you there, Steve? No. So while Steve's just getting his, he might log out and come back in again. While Stephen's getting his stuff sorted, I know he has had audio issues before, so I'm sure he'll know what to do. Stephen is a specialist accountant, and he does a lot of work in regard to viability of farming operations, so that if you've got one farm and you've got 3 kids all wanting to come home, you need to know whether you can, the farm is a viable option for more than one family, for more than 2 families, and so on. I'm going to add Stephen in again, who's obviously Director of Communication, is now gracing our screen. There you go, we've got you.
Can you hear us now, Mark?
Good to see you delegated well. And
using our Director of Communications, Alicia. Thanks very much, Alicia.
Sorry, Mark. Someone that can help you there.
You wouldn't believe it.
So, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Steve. You hear me?
Yes, thank you, Mark.
Okay, I'm going to hand over to Stephen, and Tori's going to be driving the slides for you, Steve. So
thanks, Mark. Thanks, Tori.
I'll Hold on, I probably clicked something at the same time she did, so I'll get out of the way.
All good, thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. It's 11:58 in Queensland, and obviously daylight saving down south. So I hope you're enjoying a good and fruitful session thus far. I'm sure you are. I'm an old colleague of Peter McNulty, so it was good to hear Mark talk about his catch cry. So good morning, everybody. For the next half hour, what I'd like to do is to talk about this farm viability report, which we had a brief chat about previously and has been alluded to by Mark. So the farm viability report is an accountant's report to simply look at attempting to quantify from an accounting point of view where the plan of the business is currently going and overlaid with any changes in that plan by options or decisions that you're currently having to confront. That's the general position. We do this a lot for our existing client base, regardless of the industry that they're in. We generally find that decisions are made up, as I've seen in your workbook, some of those great circular influential models. One of the impacts is to making the decision is the financial impact. Clearly there are others, family politics, needs must, external influences such as the bank, other parties, all of those clearly influence your decision. This particular session is simply saying, hey, from a financial perspective, is this situation a good idea? And if it isn't as obviously fruitful an idea as was originally considered, how do we actually give it some better chance of presenting itself? So it's really trying to take a new idea and actually make it work, as opposed to simply saying, oh no, the accountant would just give a downer in the first place. So on with that, let's get into this. I understand that this is not currently in your workbook, but it will be released to you. So if there's a bit of paper, there's a bit of wording there, don't worry, you'll get access to all of this, these templates. So let's just talk, going from my introduction the other day, let's talk about your current plan. It's up there on the screen. Consider your current plan. How's it going, quite simply? And that's a pretty difficult question to ask. So I've broken that down for a couple of other questions. See what you think about these. You know, do you and your family, whoever is working on the business, do they actually derive a salary for working in the business? Pretty straightforward question. A lot of businesses get a bit confused by this, and I say no. It's not that you're a stakeholder in the business, but you actually work in the business either full-time or part-time. Someone can do the books only, and that might be whatever, a 10-hour job per week. They deserve a salary for that. Someone else works 50 hours a week. Well, okay. You know, what is that worth? And again, in brackets there, most importantly is, how do you work out what this might be if the family does everything? Well, of course, if you go on holidays or you're sick, and you had to get somebody in to do that for you, what would you have to pay those people? So that's pretty straightforward. The next thing is, okay, you derive a salary. How much is it after tax? A lot of people talk about their salary, which includes superannuation. It might include a car. It might include accommodation. Yes, there's taxes to come out of it. At the end of the day, what goes into your bank account, your ATM? How much money do you actually get to live on per year, assuming no other income? The next question down there is, what's your total cost of living? So we've moved from the income that you derive on a week-to-week, month-to-month basis to point two, how do you spend it? What is your total, what I call cost of living? So I'm ignoring business costs here. These are your own costs, everything from the groceries, fuel, holidays, school fees, trombone lessons, you know, soccer, netball lessons, and the like. A few people might say, well, geez, there's the accountant, you know, having to list every single penny you spend. That's not the idea. What I have found for people in business, who derive their income both from a salary and from the cash generated by the business is sometimes it's not clear to them what their cost of living is because they derive their cash from these two different sources. A lot of their cash resources are not subject to tax at that point in time. So this kind of income coming into the business and cash leaving for personal expenses becomes something of a blur. So the easy answer to help people here, and don't get me wrong, I'm not interested how much the grocery bill is or how much the restaurant bill is. If you looked at all of your credit card or debit card expenditures for a year, plus any ATM withdrawals you might withdraw, or if you've got a check account and your personal account, add them all up. That's an after hours thing. And I reckon over a cup of tea or a nice glass of wine or a beer, 1 to 2 hours and you've sorted this out. It just gives you an idea of just how much money you're spending in just, normal life, family living. So once you've done that, how do the two then compare? So just over to the next slide there, please, Tori. Point 4 up there. How does your after salary and that of your partner, spouse, under the same rooftop compare to this cost of living of the same rooftop? And for a lot of people, we have found that's been a surprise to them to go, oh dear, actually when we take our after-tax salaries and we compare it to this single lump figure that we spend every year, and again, I'm not worried about what comprises that cost of living. It generally is what it is. People go, gee, I'm actually drawing profits out of the business on top of my salary to actually fund this cost of living. So before we go any further, that in itself is pretty much, I think, a very straightforward yet powerful tool to actually say for a household to be able to say to themselves, you know what? Just like people who are on a corporate salary somewhere, we are living within our means. And that is, we're not putting undue influence on the profits of the business to simply pay for our cost of living. If you do so, at least you know that you are drawing more profits out of the business than your salary. And at least you do that knowingly. You're going, okay, I need to draw these salaries, but for us to live, we actually need to draw another $1,000 a week out of the business, which then becomes what is the pre-tax of $1,000 a week of cash coming out of the business. So that's, as I say, I just dwell on point 4 because it's important to know whether or not your cost of living is actually being supported by the total after-tax salary being derived by that household. So moving forward, the next stage of this is let's just assume that works. Terrific. We're within 5 or 10%, and I have generally found most of us spend about 5% more than we earn on an after-tax basis. But let's just say within 5 or 10%, you go, no problems there. Okay. Next point: is the business consistently contributing net profits in excess of those salaries for the family that we just mentioned, so that what it creates is a cash surplus for the future? Now, what point is this cash surplus? It's actually the profits derived by the business for the business. And you can either take money out of the business, these profits, so not salary, but profit, an important distinction there, please. You can draw the money out to either pay down debt of the business itself, for example, a mortgage on either the freehold or infrastructure or business equipment, or indeed the overdraft until the seasonal sales come through. Or it is actually attributed to the owners of the business to be used for personal savings. Now, what does that mean, personal savings? I think we all know, paying down more of the mortgage of the home than otherwise, putting money into superannuation, buying other investments. And again, there's plenty of financial planning advice on this session to help you with where the money should go. My view is it's essential at this point that once we've achieved our first objective, that is the family, the household, can actually survive on their after-tax salary to pay for their cost of living, so they're not drawing on the business. Then point two, the business is actually, after paying these salaries to the family, and quite rightly, there remains a surplus, which is actually the net profit of the business relative to what has been invested in the business in the first place. And that this net profit can then be used to, as I've said up there, pay down debt of the business or for personal savings of the stakeholders. The third one, of course, is it does allow for, and I didn't document this, but if you've got surplus cash after tax, it allows for further investment, perhaps more machinery, infrastructure on the land or by buildings. I guess the singular point is, it is important, and I'll use the word critical if I can, that every business, one, pays the family a salary for their efforts, and two, there is still a net profit left after that for the business to reinvest. So let's now come down to the next point. We've now established, and I'm assuming that we have, that per your workings, you've said, yep, no problems, all straightforward. This business of ours does derive a net profit. Okay, how does that compare to the market value of the business? I'm sure everyone would be aware that generally market value of a business is driven by the net profit that it creates. Obviously, the higher the net profit, the higher the market value. Now, in some cases, that may be influenced by the underlying land, and we'll come back down to that further on. But I think it's always useful to say, or again, to compare, just as we've compared above, our take-home pay, our after-tax salary to our cost of living, yeah, that makes sense. We've got some sort of equilibrium there. Then here we've got the net profit of the business actually is of a size and value consistent with the market value of the business. I think that's pretty important. I acknowledge that, particularly in primary production, that clearly there are cycles driven predominantly by the weather, but also by product pricing, interest rates, a number of factors outside control, pestilence, etc. However, if the cycle is a 5-year cycle between wet and dry seasons and normal, then I would then suggest that we looked at the net profit averaged over that particular cycle, if I can use it, a reasonably reliable cycle. And again, say, well, over a medium period of time, call it 5 years, maybe it's 6, how again does that compare to the market value of the business? Are we being honest to the value, the monetary value of this business? Are we being honest that it's generating sufficient net profit? So moving forward, I touched on market conditions. I talked about averaging, and so in terms of market value of your business, like anybody else's in the industry they're in, there are certain factors particular to that industry or particular to the national economy as a whole that affects the performance on an annual basis. And I guess the next question is what you can do to influence this volatility. Many primary producers have obviously invested in their own dams, produce, hay sheds. I'm ignoring tax concessions here, just simply looking at what is a necessary capital expenditure on your particular business, or in your particular business, to actually smooth out some of these market conditions. I might say, on that particular point, it's the smoothing out which helps you to de-risk the business to a certain stage. Clearly, levy banks, and I'm very conscious as I say this, the circumstances in Victoria presently, levy banks and the like may well have assisted some farms, but clearly the volume of water might have undone a lot of that good work. However, it comes back to being able to invest capital expenditure within your business, comes back to the business previously providing a cash surplus, which, if not paying down debt or allowing for personal savings to the stakeholders, allows for this capital expenditure in any case into something that either makes the business more efficient, more profitable, or indeed de-risks the business, such as levee banks or in drier times, dams. Point 8, again, we're still talking about the capacity for net profits from the business. What's the farm's current capacity? It's like a manufacturing firm that has, we have a client where we're looking at it at the moment where they have built an extraordinarily large factory, invested a lot of capital in it, fantastic equipment and a great product. And they're whizzing the product out, turning over about $4.5–5 million a year. When we actually analysed it, because they were always short of cash in this particular business, we looked at it and said, gee, they took us for a tour of the factory. And what came down, what was interesting was they actually had an extra 33% capacity in the factory. So that if they had some more people, perhaps longer shifts, so there's an increase in labour cost, they actually could have produced another third again of what they were doing. And yet the fixed costs, the building's already built, the land is already owned, the machinery's already there. The fixed costs are pretty well locked in. So as I said, you'd have some increased costs in labour cost, longer shifts, perhaps some penalty rates. But if you could increase your sales by 33%, that really would have a substantial impact on the bottom line. So that simple example of a manufacturing capacity, I just put that particular model on this query sheet here for you to consider for your own business to say, gee, you know, if we spent some money, what would be the kind of capital expenditure or ongoing day-to-day expenditure that would actually allow us to increase our production even more efficiently than we're currently generating, and thus produce more income. And so would we get a good rate of return on this extra capital expenditure? All of those issues that I've just mentioned there, ladies and gentlemen, is all about trying to increase profitability on the business. And that all comes from the ability to create a current cash surplus, which is available for investments or paying down debt, rather than merely funding the cost of living for the current household. And so that's why we move from point 4 to point 8, but we come back again. How does the after-tax salary compare to this cost of living? If the business is struggling to pay the salary and the family is only just achieving its cost of living on that after-tax salary and there is no net profits going forward, then there's no cash surplus for us to invest in some of these other initiatives that might increase the profit of the business. So I'll move on to the next slide, please, Tori. Thank you. Future plan. So what we've discussed on that earlier slide is just the current plan. Where are we at? What do we look like? And by simply test checking a few of those questions, it gives us a pretty good idea of just where we are. So the next thing is the future plan, I guess, you could say to yourself, well, okay, now, so what? Well, looking ahead, how does the next 5 years look to you? So is it more of the same of doing what you're doing and hoping that prices increase or costs come down or life becomes a bit easier? And one of the examples that I used in my introductory presentation was some of the other family members coming to work on the farm is that perhaps one of the decisions that you're looking at going forward to the next 5 years? So again, just to reiterate from the previous slides, what's going to change in the next 5 years if you're not happy with questions 4 to 8 previously? And the next point is, if it is different, then let's list those options or decisions and why they're being contemplated. So Jory, if we can just move to the next slide, please. Thank you. This is the future plan. And this is just a little bit of quiet thinking time for the decision makers of any business to consider. And this all stems from reviewing our current position. If we're not happy with our current position, or if we want to improve where it is, then we may be making decisions under what I've headed there, self-imposed decisions, or below it is decisions that you still have to make and respond to that have been situations imposed by others. Now, for example, let's just go through a couple. Self-imposed decisions could be things like, should we spend further capital on the business, building dams, levy banks, buying the adjoining property, for example, so we get economies of scale. We don't need double the equipment, so, even though we may have increased our land by 50%. Our existing fleet of equipment could handle that, but we could actually, our throughput could go up considerably. So those are sort of self-imposed plans. I'll continue. Paying down debt even quicker, or responding to the financial planning advice from other speakers, maybe contributing, maybe making other acquisitions outside your particular industry. Could be passive investments, could be superannuation, could be any number of issues. They're all the kind of points that are what I call self-imposed. Let's stick with that slide for the moment. What I've generally found with this is, an hour of time in business planning is critical if it's all about quiet contemplation and focus on the issues. Again, when we do some sort of business planning with clients, one of the things I've found is that people tend to do their business planning in their car on their way home from work, or while they're doing something else. There's an old adage that says, do you know how much you plan? And everybody says, yes, yes, yes. And the question is, how much time did you spend planning for Christmas? Cards, invitations to Christmas Day, where are we going, presents to buy, who's coming? And you total all of that up, and that's a fair amount of time. Then you compare it to how much time did you actually spend planning the next calendar year for your business? And a lot of people, and I've been guilty of this myself in the earlier days, kind of go, oh, gee, I haven't actually spent as much time as I thought I needed to. So self-imposed decision-making is critical to business. There is an old saying that says no decision is still a decision being made. So best to make a list of all the things that are whirling around in one's head and those others under the same household. Put them on a piece of paper. I'm a big fan of pencil and paper, documenting it all, going through the advantages and disadvantages, and having discussions about it, mature discussions, and we'll know that everybody has their favourites, and others might react not so positively to some of them. I think it's useful, or what I have found with those things is everybody gets to have their say. Everybody else listens. And then if we really wanted to draw this out, what I have found to be really clever, and it wasn't by me at all, but it was a mediator actually suggesting that once somebody who had a fairly strong point of view expressed their view, which was unpopular to the rest of the family, somebody else who wanted to talk next actually had to summarize what that person said to make sure that they had understood all that that particular person who had the unpopular position had said. And firstly, it made it very concrete as to what the issue really was. And secondly, that person who held that unpopular view felt heard, and therefore their instance of interrupting the other people after that was minimised. Clearly, somebody has to make a decision, but the point is, at the moment, simply getting the team of stakeholders together, documenting these self-imposed decisions or opportunities, if you will, and then listing the advantages of, well, why on earth would we consider any of these? Capital expenditure, for goodness sakes. Why would we want to spend more money? Surely we can simply take more from the business over the years. That's obviously a poor shot. And the disadvantages, again, yes, time, money, effort, risk. Are we backing the right horse? All of the above. But documenting them, talking about them, and listing advantages and disadvantages, I think at least just puts it on the table so that there's no misunderstanding about it. Again, before I go to the bottom one, I'll close on that first one. Please remember that old adage: no decision is in fact a decision having been made. I take the view that in elections overseas, where it's not compulsory, it's voluntary, if a person chooses not to vote, they've already made their decision. Therefore, that decision, in my humble view, is they will accept the outcome determined by others. And that's simply the way it is. Now, if I come to this last one, imposed by others, this is where we have found things to be a little trickier, and decisions to be made by others. Again, going back to my introductory session some weeks ago, I used the example of some other family members and perhaps spouses and younger family coming to join the older family to work on the farming business. So obviously that kind of decision to be addressed is it imposed by others? Is it self-imposed? It depends clearly on the circumstances. Again, I think that particular scenario just needs to be, again, documented, discussed, advantages, disadvantages listed. Again, going back to that example, are there other family members who are working, far away from the family operation? How do they feel about this? What happens when somebody retires? Clearly, there's a lot of moving parts here that have to be considered. Again, I go back to earlier in my slide under the current plan. If somebody else is going to come and work on the farm, what's their salary? Because presumably they're leaving employment from where they are, and perhaps their spouse is too. So how much of a salary are they going to derive in the family business? Should they take a cut? Well, what for? Why? What benefit do they derive from that might be disadvantageous to the other family members who are not working on the farm? Again, where do they live? What's the accommodation like? Is there extra capital expenditure required if you've now got more people working in the business? Do we need more plant and machinery? So what we have generally found, where you have a singular yet significant transaction occurring within your family business, it actually involves other variables that sometimes aren't so obvious. So, for example, maybe our machinery needs to be bigger, faster, handle more capacity. If we're going to take on more family members with clearly a longer term perspective, maybe we need more lambs, either the neighbour or down the road or somewhere obviously convenient to the business. To my mind, this particular section here is what's being useful when there is a family discussion to draw out all of the issues involved, be they advantageous or disadvantageous, It simply allows everybody to go, well, gee, if we are going to pursue this particular course of action, what that then does is influence these other variables as well. Wow, we might have to upgrade the accommodation available to other family members. How much is that going to cost? Let's assume 50 to 100,000, just for the sake of an example. Where does that cash come from? Do we have to borrow it? Does somebody have to lend it to the business? Is it in the bank? What might that cash have been used for otherwise, or what might that borrowing capacity have been used for otherwise? It's one thing to have cash and to spend it, but I'm sure most of us have heard of this phrase, opportunity cost. Given that we are running a business to derive as best a net profit as we can off the market value of this particular asset, is this the best use of the available cash that we have to do so? If not, if the decision is more of a family decision, then I'd suggest that there's a few more people that, from the family perspective, that need to be involved in those discussions. I'll keep going, but that particular point, Australian farms are somewhat unique in that a number of people enjoy retiring, yet living on the farm, whereas other businesses have tended to be, even where there is family succession of that particular business, the older generation have been happy to sell it on, take the cash, invest it how they will, and then the newer generation have to acquire that particular asset under their own steam, or maybe there is some investment from the vendor, if you will, vendor finance. Yet all of that kind of endgame solution needs to be considered in our template here in terms of advantages and disadvantages. So even though I've called the future plan a 5-year plan, I would generally say that most of the time we generally make a decision with a long-term perspective. So my final point is, from a long-term point of view, your future plan, at the bottom of the slide, how capable do you think the current business is of financially handling the consequences of these decisions? And ladies and gentlemen, that's where our farm viability report attempts to apply the maths behind the current plan and the future plan to say, well, ignoring other variables influencing that decision, what do the numbers look like? So that's the end of my presentation. I thank everybody for their attention. Obviously, Wednesday night is our Q&A session, and I am looking forward to some feedback or questions on this presentation, as well as our tutorial number 1 of reading financial statements. So with all of that, Mark, thank you for the opportunity to present, and back to you.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Steve. Very good. And it's such an important topic, farm viability, and thanks for the contribution you've made today. And I think you're going to have a few questions on Wednesday night, and one is someone, no decision is still a decision. Someone made a comment. Someone has to decide and have responsibility and have big enough shoulders to carry the consequences, which I think, and I understand what they're saying as well. But you're right. No decision is, in some ways, is making a decision that. But
you're right, Mark. And if I may just comment on that comment, I am time did not permit, but if you now permit me to respond to that comment, I generally find inclusion of discussion is important for those people who are affected by a decision, even if they disagree with it. But ultimately, there needs to be a decision maker. And in any business, it's what they call a CEO. And I do think that once a decision is made, at least if somebody didn't like the decision, they've had the opportunity to say their piece, and at least they can go, well, okay, someone else has made the decision, but at least everyone's heard what I think about it.
That's right. Okay, good on you. Thanks, Steve. We've gone over a bit, but we'll look forward to catching you on Wednesday night.
Terrific. Thanks, Mark. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye. Well, thanks everyone, and I just want to say thank you. Sorry, we've gone a few minutes over today, but I just want to finish off by saying thank you to all the presenters today. Peter McNulty in regard to transition planning, just such a valuable issue and topic. Peter McVeigh in regard to all the advantages around superannuation and other investment strategies in not just keeping all the money on the farm. There are other ways to make sure that when time comes, as dare I use the retirement word, but as time comes that you might want to slow down, it's nice to have some off-farm sources of income so that you're not draining the farm, so to speak. Michael Cowley, thank you again for a great contribution in regard to structuring and so on. And Steve just finished in regard to the farm viability and actually looking at the numbers. It's a business, and I think that's what Steve is saying, is we need to treat it as a business, and hard decisions actually do need to be made. So I just want to finish off. Please, any questions today? Please get those out there. I know people can't necessarily read the screen, but just a reminder: tomorrow, same time, 10 o'clock to 12:30 tomorrow. And tomorrow we've got Vanessa Jansen in regard to creating silos of wealth off farm. Louise Fitzgerald Baker in regard to communication, family goal setting, and in regard to the words you'd want left behind. Tom McVeigh in regard to distribution matrix, testamentary trusts, asset protection, and due diligence reports in regard to the legal structuring and so on. And Sarah Cox will be talking in regard to resilience, family resilience and emotional resilience and so on. Vanessa, page 30, Louise, 35 to 36, Tom, 25 to 28, and Sarah Cox, 38 and 39 in your workbooks. If you'd like to have a look at those before we kick off tomorrow, I think that would be very valuable. I just want to finish off. Please send questions for Wednesday night. Make sure the dates are in your diary for that. That's 5:30 Queensland time to 7 Queensland time. And look, there's lots of information, a lot of value in regard to today's contributions by the 4 presenters, and I hope you appreciated those. Would love for your comments. I know I keep harping on about the chat roll, but we need to know which issues, which topics have been most valuable to you. Please put your comments in the chat roll so we know what's important for you and how we keep presenting that in the future. Remember, this is all about creating your master plan online, your estate and succession master plan online. This is a do-it-yourself version, and so we're hoping you're getting great ideas here. And those of you that want to can go away and do this yourself. If you want to work one-on-one on a done-for-you basis, we're going to talk more about this towards the end. But if you want to book a call to talk about that, we've created a website called workwithmarkw.com. If someone wants to put that up on the chat, thanks. Workwithmarkw.com, and we can sit down and have a chat, see if we're fit or not to work one-on-one together. But whatever happens, you've got all these online resources, and you will be able to do this for yourself. So as we promised you. So for today, thank you very much. We've gone 7 minutes over. I apologize for that. Tomorrow morning, same time as today. Look forward to seeing you here. Really grateful for your company, and have a great rest of today, and see you in the morning. Thanks for coming.